Force yourself to improve. A journey of intentional growth. Introduction. The gap between who you are and who you want to be. Let me ask you something. Right now, in this very moment, are you the person you want to be? Are you living the life you've imagined for yourself? If you're listening to this audiobook, chances are there's a gap between your current reality and your ideal vision. And that's not just okay, it's actually perfect. Because recognizing that gap is the first step toward closing it. The truth is, improvement doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't fall into your lap while you're scrolling through social media or binge-watching another series. Improvement requires something that many people find uncomfortable. It requires force. Not the kind of brutal, punishing force that breaks you down, but the kind of intentional, directed force that pushes you beyond your comfort zone and into the territory where real growth happens. This audiobook is about that force. It's about learning to become your own catalyst for change, your own push towards something better. Over the course of our time together, we're going to explore why forcing yourself to improve is not only necessary, but also deeply rewarding. We'll uncover the psychological mechanisms that keep you stuck, and more importantly, we'll discover the practical strategies that will help you break free. Think of this as a conversation between you and your future self. The person you're becoming is already inside you, waiting. But that person needs you to take action, to make hard choices, and to consistently show up even when you don't feel like it. This is your guide to making that happen. Chapter 1. Understanding the resistance. Before we can talk about forcing yourself to improve, we need to understand why improvement feels so hard in the first place. Why is it that you can know exactly what you need to do, see the path clearly in front of you, and still find yourself unable to take that first step? The answer lies in understanding resistance. Resistance is not your enemy, even though it feels that way. Resistance is actually a very old, very powerful part of your brain trying to keep you safe. Your brain is wired for survival, not for growth. It's designed to conserve energy, avoid danger, and maintain the status quo. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. Our ancestors who took unnecessary risks often didn't live long enough to pass on their genes. But in our modern world, where survival is generally not at stake, this same mechanism keeps us trapped in mediocrity. When you think about starting a new exercise routine, learning a difficult skill, or having a challenging conversation, your brain immediately begins calculating the cost. It sees effort, discomfort, and the possibility of failure. In response, it floods your consciousness with perfectly reasonable-sounding excuses. You're too tired. You don't have time. You'll start on Monday. You're not ready yet. These aren't character flaws. They're features of a brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. But here's the crucial insight. While you cannot eliminate resistance, you can learn to work with it, around it, and eventually through it. Understanding that resistance is not personal makes it less powerful. When you feel that familiar pull toward comfort and away from challenge, you can name it. You can say to yourself, "There's my brain, trying to keep me safe. Thank you, brain, but I'm going to do this anyway." The resistance you feel is actually proportional to the importance of the task. The more significant the potential change, the stronger the resistance. Steven Pressfield, in his book, The War of Art, calls this the law of resistance. If it's important, it will be hard. If it will help you grow, you'll feel every reason not to do it. Once you understand this pattern, you can actually use resistance as a compass. The things you resist most are often the things you most need to do. Think about the last time you avoided something important. Maybe it was a project you kept putting off, a conversation you knew you needed to have, or a habit you wanted to start but never did. Notice how much mental energy you spent thinking about it, worrying about it, and feeling guilty about not doing it. The irony is that the energy spent avoiding the task is often greater than the energy required to actually do it. Resistance is exhausting, but not in a productive way. There's another layer to this that we need to explore. Resistance isn't just about avoiding discomfort. It's also about avoiding identity change. When you improve, when you grow, when you become more capable, you become a different person. And even though that different person is better, stronger, and more aligned with your goals, the change itself is threatening. Your current identity, no matter how limiting, is familiar. It's known, and your brain prefers known discomfort to unknown potential. This is why people often self-sabotage just as they're about to succeed. They lose the weight, then gain it back. They build the business, then let it fall apart. They develop the skill, then stop practicing. It's not a lack of willpower. It's an identity crisis. Their actions have outpaced their self-concept, and the mind pulls them back to what feels familiar. Understanding all of this gives you tremendous power, because now you know that the voice in your head telling you to quit, to wait, to do it later, is not telling you the truth about your capabilities. It's just your brain doing its job. And you, the conscious, intentional part of you, get to decide whether to listen to it or not. It's the moment of decision, not the casual, fingers-crossed kind of decision where you hope things will work out, but the deep, committed kind of decision where you burn the boats and remove the option of retreat. Making this kind of decision feels dramatic because it is dramatic. It's the moment where you stop negotiating with yourself and start dictating terms. You're no longer asking if you'll do the work. You're determining how and when. This shift from possibility to certainty changes everything. Think about the areas of your life where you've already achieved some level of mastery or success. Maybe it's your career, or a skill you've developed, or a relationship you've nurtured. If you look back honestly, you'll probably find a moment where you decided, really decided, to commit. Before that moment, you were interested. After that moment, you were invested. The difference between these two states is the difference between wishing and doing. But here's where most advice about decision-making goes wrong. People talk about decisions as if they're one-time events. You decide once, and then you follow through. But the reality of forcing yourself to improve is that you have to make the decision over and over again. You decide when you wake up in the morning. You decide when you face the first challenge of the day. You decide every single time resistance shows up. The good news is that each decision makes the next one slightly easier. You're building what psychologists call self-efficacy, which is essentially your belief in your own ability to execute on your intentions. Every time you follow through on a commitment to yourself, you're providing evidence that you're the kind of person who does what they say they'll do. This evidence accumulates over time, making the decision to push forward feel less like forcing and more like following through. There's a concept in physics called activation energy. It's the initial amount of energy required to start a chemical reaction. Once the reaction begins, it often sustains itself or even releases energy. The same principle applies to personal improvement. The hardest part is always the beginning. Starting the workout is harder than finishing it. Writing the first sentence is harder than writing the next 10. Making the first call is harder than making the 20th. Understanding this can help you strategize. Instead of trying to motivate yourself for the entire journey, you only need to motivate yourself for the start. You need enough force to overcome that initial activation energy. After that, momentum begins to work in your favor. You've probably experienced this yourself. The days when you really don't want to exercise are often the days when you feel best afterward. The projects you resist starting are often the ones you get most absorbed in once you begin. So, how do you generate that initial force? How do you push yourself over the activation energy threshold? The answer is by making the decision smaller and more immediate. Instead of deciding to get in shape, you decide to put on your workout clothes right now. Instead of deciding to write a book, you decide to write for 15 minutes today. You're not forcing yourself to complete the entire journey. You're just forcing yourself to take the next step. This is where many people misunderstand what it means to force yourself to improve. They imagine it as a constant battle, a daily exercise in willpower and gritted teeth. But that's not sustainable, and more importantly, it's not necessary. What you're really doing is forcing yourself past the initial resistance, past the activation energy, and into the flow state where action feels natural. There's also something powerful about making your decision public or visible. When you tell someone else about your commitment, when you write it down, when you create some external accountability, you're adding weight to your decision. You're making it real in a way that purely internal commitments never are. This doesn't mean you need to announce every goal to the world, but some form of external reinforcement helps bridge the gap between intention and action. The decision to force yourself to improve is ultimately a decision about identity. You're deciding to become a different person. Not completely different, but different in important ways. You're deciding that the temporary discomfort of change is worth the permanent benefit of growth. And you're acknowledging that this change won't happen passively. It requires your active, intentional participation. It's that surge of energy and enthusiasm that makes everything feel possible. But motivation is also unreliable. It comes and goes based on your mood, your energy level, and 1,000 other factors beyond your control. If you're relying solely on motivation to force yourself to improve, you're building your future on quicksand. What you need instead is discipline. And discipline is not about being harder on yourself or developing some superhuman willpower. Discipline is infrastructure. It's the systems, habits, and environments you create that make improvement the path of least resistance. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine two people who both want to exercise regularly. Person A relies on motivation. They keep their gym clothes in the closet. They decide each morning whether or not they feel like exercising. They wait for the right mood to strike. Person B builds infrastructure. They lay out their gym clothes the night before. They schedule their workout at the same time every day. They've told their workout partner they'll be there. They've created an environment where not exercising actually requires more effort than exercising. Who do you think is more likely to succeed over the long term? Person B has removed the need for constant decision-making. They've automated the behavior they want by making it the default option. This is the essence of discipline as infrastructure. The most powerful infrastructure you can build is the infrastructure of habits. Habits are behaviors that have become automatic through repetition. They're the brain's way of conserving energy by turning repeated actions into unconscious routines. When a behavior becomes a habit, it no longer requires the same level of force to execute. The resistance drops dramatically. But forming habits takes time and intentionality. Research suggests it takes anywhere from 18 to 254 days for a behavior to become automatic, with the average being around 66 days. During this formation period, you do need to force yourself. You need to show up even when you don't feel like it. You need to execute the behavior even when it's uncomfortable. But you're not forcing yourself forever. You're forcing yourself long enough for the behavior to become automatic. The key to building habits that stick is to start smaller than you think you should. If you want to develop a reading habit, don't commit to reading for an hour every day. Commit to reading 1 page. If you want to start meditating, don't commit to 30 minutes of practice. Commit to 30 seconds. These micro-commitments might seem trivial, but they accomplish something crucial. They establish the pattern without overwhelming your resistance. Once the pattern is established, once showing up becomes automatic, you can gradually increase the intensity. But in the beginning, your only goal is consistency. You're teaching your brain that this new behavior is part of who you are now. You're rewiring your neural pathways one repetition at a time. Environment design is another critical piece of infrastructure. Your environment is constantly shaping your behavior, usually in ways you don't consciously notice. If your kitchen is full of junk food, you'll eat junk food. If your phone is next to your bed, you'll check it first thing in the morning. If your running shoes are in the closet, you probably won't go running. These aren't willpower failures. They're environment failures. The solution is to design your environment to support the person you want to become. Make good behaviors obvious and easy. Make bad behaviors invisible and difficult. Want to drink more water? Put water bottles everywhere you spend time. Want to stop watching so much television? Unplug the TV and put the remote in a drawer in another room. Want to practice your instrument? Leave it out on a stand where you'll see it every day. This might seem like you're tricking yourself, and in a way, you are. But it's a beneficial trick. You're using your understanding of how your brain works to overcome the limitations of your willpower. You're acknowledging that you won't always have the energy to make good decisions, so you're making the good decision in advance by shaping your environment. Another piece of infrastructure is the system of tracking and measurement. What gets measured gets managed, as the saying goes. When you track your progress, you're creating a feedback loop that helps you stay on course. You can see what's working and what isn't. You can celebrate small wins. You can identify patterns in your behavior that you might otherwise miss. The tracking doesn't need to be complicated. A simple check mark on a calendar can be incredibly motivating. Jerry Seinfeld famously used this method for his writing practice. He put a big X on his calendar for every day he wrote jokes, and his only goal was to not break the chain. The visual representation of his consistency became its own reward. But tracking also serves another purpose. It provides evidence of your progress when motivation is low. On the days when you feel like you're not getting anywhere, when you're tempted to quit, you can look back at your tracking system and see the proof that you're actually moving forward. You're not starting from zero. You've already put in the work. This evidence can be the force you need to keep going. Accountability is yet another form of infrastructure. When you share your goals with someone else, when you check in regularly with a coach or a friend, when you join a group of people working towards similar objectives, you're creating external pressure that reinforces your internal commitment. This isn't about shame or judgment. It's about creating a structure that makes it harder to quit than to continue. Some people resist the idea of needing external accountability. They feel like they should be able to do it on their own, that needing others is a sign of weakness. But this is exactly backward. Building a support structure is a sign of wisdom. It's recognizing that sustainable change happens in community, not in isolation. Even the most disciplined people in the world have coaches, mentors, and accountability partners. The final piece of infrastructure I want to discuss is the infrastructure of recovery. Forcing yourself to improve doesn't mean pushing yourself to the point of burnout. In fact, strategic rest and recovery are essential components of sustainable growth. Your body and mind need time to consolidate learning, repair tissue, and restore energy. Without adequate recovery, you're not optimizing your improvement. You're sabotaging it. Building in recovery time is not optional. It's not something you do if you have time left over. It's a critical part of the infrastructure. This means scheduling rest days. It means getting adequate sleep. It means taking breaks during focused work. It means allowing yourself periods of lower intensity. The goal is sustainable improvement over years and decades, not a sprint that leaves you exhausted and burned out after a few months. When you have all of this infrastructure in place, when you've built systems that support your growth, the amount of force required to improve drops dramatically. You're no longer fighting against yourself every day. You're flowing along paths you've deliberately created. The discipline becomes easier because it's embedded in your environment, your habits, and your social structure. Chapter 4. The Psychology of Incremental Progress. One of the biggest mistakes people make when trying to force themselves to improve is thinking too big. They imagine massive transformations, dramatic before and after stories, complete reinventions of themselves. And while there's nothing wrong with having ambitious long-term goals, focusing only on the end result can actually paralyze you and prevent you from starting at all. The reality of improvement is that it happens through accumulation, not through sudden leaps. It happens through small, consistent actions repeated over time. It happens through what I call the psychology of incremental progress. Imagine trying to move a boulder. If you try to lift it all at once, you'll fail. But if you have a lever and a fulcrum, you can move that same boulder with relatively little force by moving it small distances repeatedly. This is the principle of incremental progress. You're not trying to accomplish everything today. You're trying to move the boulder a few inches, knowing that if you do this consistently, you'll eventually move it as far as you need to go. There's a concept from Japan called Kaizen, which translates roughly to continuous improvement. It emerged from Japanese manufacturing but has profound applications for personal development. The idea is that you seek to improve by just 1% each day, or even each week. These improvements are so small that they're barely noticeable in the moment. But compounded over time, they lead to remarkable results. Let's do some simple math to illustrate this. If you improve by just 1% each day after 1 year, you'll be 37 times better than when you started. That's the power of compound growth. But here's the flip side. If you decline by 1% each day, perhaps by skipping your practice or choosing the easy path, after 1 year you'll be nearly at zero. The same principle that can transform you can also diminish you, depending on the direction of your daily choices. This is why your daily actions matter so much more than your occasional moments of inspiration. The person who writes for 15 minutes every single day will accomplish far more than the person who writes for 8 hours once a month. The person who does 10 push-ups every morning will get stronger than the person who does an intense workout once a week and then quits because it's too hard. But incremental progress is psychologically challenging because it doesn't feel like progress. When you're only moving the needle a tiny bit each day, it's hard to see the change. You look in the mirror and you look the same. You check your bank account and the numbers haven't dramatically changed. You assess your skills and you don't feel noticeably better. This lack of immediate feedback is one of the main reasons people quit. This is where you need to understand the nature of growth curves. Improvement is rarely linear. It's not like climbing a steady incline where each step takes you higher at a consistent rate. Instead, improvement often follows what's called an S-curve or a stepwise pattern. You plateau for a while as your brain and body integrate new skills or behaviors. Then suddenly, seemingly overnight, you have a breakthrough and jump to a new level. Then you plateau again as you consolidate those gains. If you don't understand this pattern, the plateaus will discourage you. You'll think you're not making progress, that your efforts aren't working, that maybe you've hit your limit. But the truth is that the plateau is where most of the important work is happening. Your neural pathways are being strengthened. Your body is adapting to new demands. Your mind is integrating new concepts. The visible breakthrough is just the moment when all that invisible work becomes apparent. Think of it like heating water. You apply heat consistently, and for a long time, the water just gets warmer. If you measured the temperature, you'd see progress, but if you're just watching the pot, it looks exactly the same. Then suddenly, it reaches boiling point and transforms into steam. The change seems sudden, but it was actually the result of all that accumulated heat. This is why tracking your progress is so valuable, as we discussed earlier. When you can't see the change with your eyes, you can see it in your data. You ran a little faster than last month. You lifted a little more weight. You meditated for a few more minutes. You read a few more pages. The numbers provide evidence that you're moving forward even when it doesn't feel like it. But there's an emotional component to incremental progress that we need to address. It requires patience, which is a virtue that our modern world does not cultivate. We're used to instant gratification, to immediate results, to fast everything. The idea of working towards something for months or years before seeing significant results feels almost unbearable to many people. This is where you need to develop what Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset. Instead of viewing your abilities as fixed traits that you either have or don't have, you need to view them as capacities that can be developed through effort and learning. When you have a growth mindset, the process becomes more important than the outcome. You're not asking, "Am I good at this?" You're asking, "Am I getting better at this?" This shift in perspective transforms how you experience the journey of improvement. Challenges become opportunities rather than threats. Setbacks become information rather than failures. The plateau becomes a necessary phase of integration rather than a sign that you should quit. You're focused on the trajectory rather than the position. Let me share a powerful reframe that can help you embrace incremental progress. Instead of asking, "How far do I have to go?" ask, "How far have I come?" This simple shift in perspective can dramatically change your emotional experience of the improvement process. When you're focused on the gap between where you are and where you want to be, you feel discouraged. But when you focus on the distance you've already traveled, you feel empowered. Another strategy for making incremental progress more psychologically rewarding is to create milestones along the way. These are markers that let you pause and acknowledge your progress. Maybe it's after your first month of consistent practice, or after you've completed a certain number of repetitions, or when you achieve a specific sub-goal. These milestones give you opportunities to celebrate, which reinforces the behavior and makes it more likely that you'll continue. The celebration doesn't need to be extravagant. It can be as simple as taking a moment to reflect on what you've accomplished, treating yourself to something you enjoy, or sharing your progress with someone who cares. The key is to mark the moment, to consciously acknowledge that you're moving in the right direction. This creates positive associations with the work you're doing, which makes it easier to continue. There's also something profound about learning to enjoy the process itself rather than just anticipating the result. When you can find satisfaction in the daily practice, in the gradual improvement, in the small wins, the entire journey becomes more sustainable and more enjoyable. You're no longer suffering through the present while waiting for some future payoff. You're actually living your improved life right now, in each moment of practice and growth. This doesn't mean every moment will feel good. Some days will be hard. Some practices will be tedious. Some periods will feel like you're slogging through mud. But there's a difference between difficulty that's meaningful and difficulty that's pointless. When you understand that this difficulty is building something, that each hard moment is an investment in your future self, it becomes easier to bear. The psychology of incremental progress ultimately comes down to faith. Not religious faith necessarily, but faith in the process. Faith that small actions repeated consistently will lead to significant results. Faith that you're capable of more than you currently believe. Faith that the person you're becoming is worth the effort required to get there. This faith is tested daily, especially during the plateaus and setbacks. But if you can maintain it, if you can keep showing up and doing the work even when you can't see immediate results, you'll eventually look back and be amazed at how far you've traveled. Chapter 5. Confronting the Fear of Failure. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the thing that stops more people from forcing themselves to improve than perhaps any other single factor. It's not laziness, though it often disguises itself as such. It's not lack of time, though we use that excuse frequently. It's fear. Specifically, the fear of failure. This fear is so powerful because it's deeply personal. When you try something and fail, it feels like evidence about who you are as a person. It feels like confirmation that you're not good enough, not smart enough, not capable enough. And your brain, in its endless quest to protect you from harm, suggests that the best way to avoid this painful feeling is simply not to try at all. If you never attempt, you can never fail. This is the logic that keeps people stuck. They have dreams they never pursue, skills they never develop, conversations they never have, all because the fear of failure looms larger than the possibility of success. And the tragic irony is that in avoiding the pain of potential failure, they guarantee the pain of regret and unfulfilled potential. But here's what you need to understand about failure. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is the pathway to success. Every person who has achieved anything significant has failed repeatedly along the way. The difference between them and people who remain stuck is not that they didn't fear failure. It's that they acted despite the fear. Let's examine what failure actually is. At its core, failure is simply getting a result that's different from what you wanted or expected. That's it. It's information. It's feedback. It's data about what works and what doesn't. The shame, the embarrassment, the sense of inadequacy, all of that is meaning we add to the experience. The experience itself is neutral. Think about how you learned to walk as a child. You fell down hundreds, maybe thousands of times. Did you interpret each fall as evidence of your inadequacy? Did you decide that walking wasn't for you, that you were a falling kind of person? Of course not. You just got up and tried again. You treated each fall as information, as a necessary part of the learning process. And eventually, through repeated attempts and repeated failures, you learned to walk. Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, most of us lost this natural resilience. We developed a fixed mindset about our abilities. We started interpreting failure as permanent rather than temporary, as comprehensive rather than specific, as personal rather than situational. And this interpretation is what makes failure painful, not the failure itself. The first step in confronting your fear of failure is to change your relationship with it. Instead of seeing failure as something to avoid at all costs, see it as something to engage with consciously and learn from. Each failure is an experiment that provides data. What did you try? What result did you get? What can you learn from the gap between what you expected and what actually happened? How can you adjust your approach based on this new information? This is called adopting an experimental mindset. When you're running an experiment, there are no failures, only results. Some results confirm your hypothesis, and some results disconfirm it. But both types of results are valuable. They both teach you something. In fact, the results that disconfirm your hypothesis are often more valuable because they point you in a new direction, toward approaches you might not have considered. But let's be honest. Even with this reframe, failure still doesn't feel good. Getting rejected hurts. Making mistakes in public is embarrassing. Falling short of your goals is disappointing. You don't need to pretend otherwise. The goal is not to make failure feel good. The goal is to make it feel worth it, to make it feel like a price you're willing to pay for the possibility of success and growth. One way to make failure feel more bearable is to expect it. When you start something new, when you're pushing yourself to improve, assume that you'll fail multiple times along the way. Build that assumption into your plan. Instead of asking, "What if I fail?" ask, "When I fail, how will I respond?" This shifts failure from a possibility that might derail you to an expectation that you're prepared for. Athletes and performers often use pre-mortems to prepare for potential failures. Before a big event, they imagine everything that could go wrong and plan how they'll respond. This doesn't make them pessimistic. It makes them resilient. When something does go wrong, as things inevitably do, they're not caught off guard. They've already mentally rehearsed the recovery, so they can execute it quickly and get back on track. You can use this same technique for any area where you're trying to improve. If you're building a new business, imagine all the ways it could fail and plan your responses. If you're learning a new skill, anticipate the challenges and setbacks you'll face and decide in advance how you'll handle them. This preparation doesn't guarantee you won't fail, but it does guarantee that failure won't stop you. Another powerful strategy for reducing the fear of failure is to separate your actions from your identity. You are not your results. A failed attempt doesn't make you a failure as a person. A mistake doesn't make you a mistake. You're a person who took a risk, who tried something difficult, who put yourself out there despite the possibility of failure. That's actually something to be proud of, regardless of the outcome. This distinction is crucial, because when failure becomes about identity, it becomes existential. It threatens your sense of self. But when failure is just about a specific action, in a specific context, at a specific time, it becomes manageable. You can fail at something without being a failure. You can make a mistake without being a mistake. You can fall short without being inadequate. There's also something liberating about accepting that you will never be perfect. Perfectionism is often a sophisticated form of self-protection. If you never put anything out into the world unless it's perfect, you never have to face real feedback or real rejection. But this also means you never improve, never grow, never achieve anything significant. Perfectionism doesn't protect you from failure. It guarantees it by preventing you from ever really trying. The antidote to perfectionism is what I call excellent imperfectionism. You aim for excellence, you give your best effort, you care about the quality of your work. But you also accept that excellence is not the same as perfection. Excellence is within reach. Perfection is not. Excellence allows for iteration and improvement. Perfection demands that you get it right the first time, which is almost never how real growth happens. When you're forcing yourself to improve, you need to give yourself permission to be bad at things initially. You need to allow yourself the dignity of incompetence. Every master was once a beginner. Every expert was once clueless. The only difference between them and people who never develop mastery is that they were willing to be bad for long enough to become good. This is where having a growth mindset becomes absolutely critical. When you believe that abilities can be developed, failure becomes less threatening because it's just a snapshot of your current capability, not a permanent statement about your potential. You're not asking, "Am I good at this?" You're asking, "What do I need to learn to get better at this?" Let me share a perspective that might help you reframe your relationship with failure. Every successful person you admire has failed more than you have. They've taken more shots and missed more often. They've been rejected more times. They've made more mistakes. The reason they're successful is not that they avoided failure. It's that they attempted more and persisted longer. Their success is built on a foundation of failures that taught them what to do differently. Thomas Edison famously said he didn't fail 10,000 times while inventing the light bulb. He just found 10,000 ways that didn't work. Each failure eliminated an option and brought him closer to the solution. This is the mindset you need to cultivate. You're not failing. You're eliminating options. You're gathering data. You're learning what doesn't work so you can focus on what does. But what about the emotional pain of failure? What about the shame and embarrassment? These are real feelings that can't be simply thought away. Here's where self-compassion becomes essential. When you fail, the way you talk to yourself matters enormously. If you're harsh and critical, if you berate yourself and confirm your worst fears, you're actually making it less likely that you'll try again. You're punishing yourself for taking a risk, which teaches your brain that taking risks is dangerous. Instead, treat yourself the way you treat a good friend who was struggling. You'd be supportive. You'd be encouraging. You'd help them see the situation in perspective. You'd remind them of their strengths and past successes. You'd validate their feelings while also helping them move forward. Give yourself this same compassion. Failure is hard enough without adding self-inflicted cruelty on top of it. There's one more aspect of failure we need to discuss, and that's the fear of other people's judgment. Often, we're not just afraid of failing. We're afraid of being seen failing. We're afraid of what people will think, what they'll say, how they'll judge us. This social dimension of failure can be even more powerful than the personal dimension. But here's a truth that might set you free. Most people are too busy worrying about their own lives to spend much time judging yours. The spotlight effect makes us think everyone is watching and evaluating us when in reality, most people barely notice. And the few who do notice and judge, their opinion says more about them than about you. People who mock others for trying and failing are usually people who are too afraid to try themselves. Moreover, the people whose opinions actually matter, the people who truly care about you, will respect you more for trying and failing than for never trying at all. They know that growth requires risk, and that risk inevitably leads to failure sometimes. They've experienced it themselves. And if someone important to you can't extend that understanding, that's valuable information about the relationship. Forcing yourself to improve means forcing yourself to risk failure repeatedly. It means accepting that you'll be uncomfortable, that you'll make mistakes, that you'll sometimes fall short of your goals. But it also means giving yourself the chance to succeed, to grow, to discover capabilities you didn't know you had. And that chance, that possibility, is worth confronting your fear. How do you find the time to work out? How do you make time for learning? How do you fit personal development into an already busy schedule? These are valid questions, but they miss something crucial. Time is finite and equal for everyone. You have the same 24 hours as everyone else. The real constraint, the real limiting factor in your ability to improve, is not time. It's energy. Energy management is about understanding that not all hours are created equal. An hour when you're fresh, focused, and motivated is worth far more than an hour when you're exhausted, distracted, and depleted. The question is not just how you spend your time, but what condition you're in when you spend it. Think about your own experience. You've probably had days where you accomplished more in 2 highly focused hours than in an entire unfocused afternoon. You've had mornings where you had brilliant insights and evenings where you could barely string together a coherent thought. The difference wasn't the amount of time available. It was your energy level and mental state. Energy operates across multiple dimensions. There's physical energy, which is about your body's capacity for activity and exertion. There's emotional energy, which is about your capacity to engage with others and manage your feelings. There's mental energy, which is about your capacity for focus, problem solving, and creativity. And there's spiritual energy, which is about your sense of purpose, meaning, and connection to something larger than yourself. Each type of energy has its own sources and its own drains. Physical energy comes from sleep, nutrition, and exercise. Emotional energy comes from positive relationships, self-care, and emotional processing. Mental energy comes from rest, variety, and challenging but achievable tasks. Spiritual energy comes from alignment with your values, contribution to others, and time for reflection. The problem is that modern life is designed to drain your energy across all these dimensions simultaneously. You're sleep-deprived, eating poorly, sitting too much, dealing with toxic relationships or workplace dynamics, constantly overstimulated by technology, and disconnected from any sense of deeper purpose. No wonder you struggle to find the energy to improve yourself. You're running on empty. Forcing yourself to improve when you're depleted is like trying to drive a car with no gas in the tank. You can press the accelerator as hard as you want, but you're not going anywhere. This is why willpower-based approaches to self-improvement often fail. They ask you to exert more force when what you actually need is more fuel. So the first step in managing your energy is to audit where your energy is going currently. For 1 week, track how different activities affect your energy levels across all 4 dimensions. After spending time with certain people, do you feel energized or drained? After certain types of work, do you feel focused or scattered? After certain foods, do you feel vital or sluggish? After consuming certain media, do you feel inspired or deflated? This audit will reveal patterns you might not have consciously noticed. You might discover that checking your phone first thing in the morning sets a scattered tone for your entire day. You might realize that certain relationships are consistently depleting you while others consistently energize you. You might find that you're most mentally sharp in the morning, but you're scheduling your most important work for the afternoon when your energy is lower. Once you understand your energy patterns, you can start to design your life around them rather than against them. This is what I call energy architecture. You're deliberately structuring your day, your week, and your commitments to maximize your energy for the things that matter most. The concept of chronotypes is relevant here. You've probably heard of morning people and night people. These are real biological differences in when people's energy and focus peak throughout the day. If you're a morning person and you're trying to force yourself to do your most important work at night, you're fighting your biology. You can win occasionally through sheer force of will, but it's not sustainable. Instead, schedule your most demanding tasks during your peak energy windows. If you're trying to write, to learn something complex, to have difficult conversations, to make important decisions, do these things when your mental energy is highest. Save the low-energy tasks, like responding to routine emails or doing administrative work, for your low-energy windows. But energy architecture goes beyond just timing. It's also about sequencing. Some activities generate energy while others consume it. Some activities are energetically costly but necessary. Others are costly and unnecessary. You want to sequence your day so that energy-generating activities help fuel energy-consuming activities. For example, physical exercise, counterintuitively, often generates more energy than it consumes, especially if you're exercising at a moderate intensity. Many people find that a morning workout gives them more energy for the entire day. Similarly, connecting with people you care about, engaging in creative activities you enjoy, or spending time in nature often replenishes more energy than they require. On the flip side, endlessly scrolling social media, arguing online, consuming negative news, or sitting in pointless meetings are all energy sinks that give you nothing in return. Minimizing these drains is just as important as maximizing your energy sources. There's also the question of energy recovery. Just as you can't sprint all day without rest, you can't operate at peak energy levels continuously. You need deliberate recovery periods built into your schedule. This isn't laziness. This is strategic energy management. Recovery looks different depending on what type of energy you need to replenish. Physical recovery might be sleep, rest days from exercise, or simply sitting down after being on your feet. Mental recovery might be a walk without your phone, a hobby that engages a different part of your brain, or meditation. Emotional recovery might be time alone after being around people all day, or time with close friends after dealing with difficult situations. Spiritual recovery might be time in nature, engagement with your faith tradition, or reflection on what matters most to you. The key insight is that recovery is not the absence of activity. It's a different type of activity. You're not just stopping, you're actively restoring. The most effective forms of recovery are those that engage you in a restorative way rather than simply numbing you out. This is why watching television for hours rarely feels genuinely restorative, even though it requires minimal effort. It's passive consumption that doesn't engage you in a meaningful way. Compare this to reading a book you love, having a deep conversation with a friend, or working on a creative project with no pressure. These activities might require more engagement, but they restore you in a way that passive consumption doesn't. Sleep deserves special attention in any discussion of energy management. Sleep is the foundation of all energy. When you're sleep-deprived, everything becomes harder. Your physical performance declines. Your emotional regulation suffers. Your mental clarity drops. Your sense of meaning and purpose diminishes. And yet, sleep is often the first thing people sacrifice when they're trying to do more. This is tragically backwards. If you want to improve, if you want to accomplish more, if you want to operate at a higher level, protecting your sleep should be non-negotiable. The research is unambiguous on this point. Most adults need 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night for optimal functioning. When you consistently get less than this, you accumulate sleep debt that impairs your performance in ways you don't even notice because you adapt to your impaired state and think it's normal. Improving your sleep often has more impact on your capacity for self-improvement than any other single change you could make. Better sleep means more energy, better focus, improved emotional resilience, enhanced learning and memory consolidation, and stronger physical recovery. All of these factors directly support your ability to force yourself to improve in other areas. The same principle applies to nutrition. Food is fuel, and the quality of your fuel affects the quality of your energy. When you eat processed foods high in sugar and unhealthy fats, you get quick spikes of energy followed by crashes that leave you more depleted than before. When you eat whole foods with balanced macronutrients, you get steady, sustained energy that supports consistent performance. You don't need to become obsessive about nutrition or follow some extreme diet. You just need to recognize that what you eat directly impacts your energy levels, which directly impacts your capacity for improvement. Eating in a way that supports your energy is not separate from your improvement efforts. It's foundational to them. Movement is another non-negotiable element of energy management. Your body is designed to move, and when it doesn't, everything suffers. Sedentary behavior doesn't conserve energy the way you might think. Instead, it creates a cycle of low energy and physical deconditioning that makes movement feel even harder. The solution is not necessarily intense exercise, though that has its place. The solution is regular, varied movement throughout your day. Standing instead of sitting, walking instead of driving when possible, taking the stairs, stretching, dancing, playing. All of this keeps your body functioning optimally and maintains your energy levels. When you combine adequate sleep, good nutrition, and regular movement, you create a foundation of physical energy that supports everything else you're trying to do. Without this foundation, forcing yourself to improve becomes exhausting and unsustainable. With this foundation, improvement feels more like unlocking potential than like grinding through resistance. But physical energy is only part of the equation. Your emotional energy is equally important and often more neglected. Emotional energy is depleted by unresolved conflicts, suppressed feelings, toxic relationships, constant stress, and lack of emotional processing. It's replenished by healthy relationships, emotional expression, self-compassion, joy, and connection. Many people try to improve themselves while completely ignoring their emotional state. They wonder why they can't maintain motivation, why they keep self-sabotaging, why they feel resistant to taking action. Often, the issue is not a lack of discipline or willpower. It's that their emotional tank is empty and they're trying to run on fumes. Attending to your emotional energy means giving yourself permission to feel what you feel. It means processing difficult emotions rather than pushing them down. It means setting boundaries in relationships that drain you. It means seeking out and nurturing relationships that energize you. It means being honest with yourself about what's really going on beneath the surface. This emotional work is not separate from your improvement efforts. It's integral to them. When you're emotionally depleted, everything requires more force. When you're emotionally resourced, you have more capacity for growth and change. Mental energy is about your cognitive capacity, your ability to focus, think clearly, make decisions, and solve problems. Mental energy is depleted by constant context, switching, information overload, decision fatigue, and lack of cognitive rest. It's replenished by deep focus, cognitive challenge within your capability range, learning, and adequate mental rest. In our modern environment, mental energy is under constant assault. Your attention is fragmented across multiple devices, apps, and streams of information. You're making countless micro-decisions throughout the day. You're rarely in a state of sustained focus on anything. This constant cognitive load drains your mental energy without you even realizing it. Protecting your mental energy means creating space for deep work, for sustained focus on meaningful tasks. It means reducing unnecessary decisions by automating or systematizing routine choices. It means limiting your information intake to what's actually useful rather than consuming everything available. It means taking breaks that allow your mind to rest and consolidate learning. Finally, spiritual energy is about your sense of purpose, meaning, and connection. It's the energy that comes from feeling that your life matters, that your efforts are directed towards something worthwhile, that you're part of something larger than yourself. Spiritual energy is depleted by meaningless activity, disconnection from your values, lack of contribution to others, and existential emptiness. It's replenished by purpose-driven action, value alignment, service to others, and transcendent experiences. This might be the most neglected type of energy in discussions of self-improvement, but it's arguably the most important. When you have a strong sense of purpose, when you feel connected to something meaningful, you have a wellspring of energy that sustains you through difficulty. You can endure discomfort, persist through setbacks, and maintain effort over long periods because the why is compelling enough to fuel the how. Viktor Frankl, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, observed that those who survived the concentration camps were not necessarily the strongest or the healthiest. They were those who had a strong sense of purpose, a reason to keep going. Purpose provided energy that transcended physical circumstances. This is why clarifying your purpose and aligning your improvement efforts with your deepest values is so critical. When you're forcing yourself to improve in service of something that truly matters to you, the force required is less because the motivation is intrinsic. You're not pushing yourself towards someone else's definition of success. You're pulling yourself toward your own vision of a meaningful life. Managing energy across all these dimensions requires attention and intention. It requires treating yourself like an athlete treats their body, with respect for your limits and deliberate strategies for recovery and optimization. It requires saying no to things that drain you unnecessarily, and yes, to things that replenish you genuinely. When you master energy management, forcing yourself to improve becomes less about raw willpower and more about strategic resource allocation. You're not trying to accomplish everything through sheer force of will. You're creating conditions where improvement becomes the natural expression of your well-managed energy. Chapter 7. The Power of Identity. Based change. There's a fundamental question at the heart of all lasting improvement. Who do you think you are? I don't mean your name or your job title or your demographic categories. I mean your deep, core sense of identity. Because the truth is, your behavior flows from your identity more than from your goals or your intentions. Most people approach change backwards. They focus on what they want to achieve or what they want to do. They set outcome-based goals like, I want to lose 20 pounds, or I want to write a book, or I want to earn more money. And while there's nothing wrong with these goals, focusing solely on outcomes often leads to short-term changes followed by regression to your previous patterns. The reason is simple. Outcomes are external. They're separate from who you are. You can achieve an outcome through temporary behavior change, but if that behavior isn't integrated into your identity, you'll eventually revert back to acting like who you believe you are at your core. Identity-based change works differently. Instead of starting with what you want to achieve, you start with who you want to become. You ask, what kind of person do I want to be? What would that person do in this situation? How would that person handle this challenge? And then you act in alignment with that identity. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine two people who are both trying to quit smoking. When offered a cigarette, the first person says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." The second person says, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker." Both are refusing the cigarette, but notice the difference in how they're thinking about themselves. The first person still identifies as a smoker who is temporarily trying not to smoke. Their identity hasn't changed. They're just fighting against their identity through willpower. This is exhausting and usually unsustainable. Eventually, in a moment of weakness or stress, they'll revert to the behavior that aligns with their identity. The second person has shifted their identity. They no longer see themselves as a smoker. A cigarette isn't something they're resisting. It's something that doesn't fit with who they are. This makes the behavior change much easier to sustain because there's no internal conflict. They're not fighting themselves, they're being themselves. This principle applies to any area where you want to improve. If you want to become physically fit, the question is not just what exercises you'll do or what diet you'll follow. The question is, do you see yourself as an athletic person, as someone who prioritizes their health and fitness? If you want to become a writer, the question is not just whether you write regularly. The question is, do you see yourself as a writer? Your identity is like a gravitational pull. It constantly draws your behavior back toward what's consistent with your self-concept. When your behavior diverges too far from your identity, you experience cognitive dissonance, a psychological discomfort that motivates you to resolve the inconsistency. Usually, you resolve it by changing your behavior to match your identity rather than changing your identity to match your behavior. This is why identity-based change is so powerful. When you shift your identity, you shift the gravitational center that your behavior orbits around. The behaviors that used to require willpower and force become natural expressions of who you are. You're not forcing yourself anymore. You're just being yourself. But here's the challenge. How do you change your identity? Identity feels fundamental and fixed. You've been you for your entire life. How do you become someone different? The answer is both simpler and more profound than you might expect. You change your identity through the accumulation of evidence. Your identity is not some mystical, unchangeable essence. It's a story you tell yourself about who you are, and that story is based on evidence from your past behavior. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you believe you are. When you make your bed, you're casting a vote for being an organized person. When you write for 10 minutes, you're casting a vote for being a writer. When you go to the gym, you're casting a vote for being an athletic person. One vote doesn't change your identity. But if you cast enough votes in the direction of a new identity, eventually, the evidence accumulates to the point where you start to believe the new story about yourself. Your self-concept shifts not through some dramatic moment of transformation, but through the slow accumulation of actions that demonstrate who you're becoming. This is why small, consistent behaviors are so powerful for identity change. They may not seem like much in the moment, but they're gathering evidence. They're building a case. With each repetition, you're strengthening the neural pathways associated with this new identity. You're making it easier to see yourself in this new way. James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habits. He suggests that the most effective way to build a new habit is to focus on becoming the type of person who does that thing, rather than focusing on the outcome you want to achieve. Want to be healthier? Start thinking of yourself as a healthy person and ask what a healthy person would do in each situation. Want to be more productive? Start thinking of yourself as a productive person and act accordingly. This doesn't mean you need to completely reinvent yourself overnight. In fact, trying to make too dramatic an identity shift too quickly often backfires because the evidence doesn't support it yet. If you've never exercised and you suddenly start telling yourself you're an athlete, your mind will reject this narrative as inconsistent with reality. The cognitive dissonance will be too great. Instead, you start with small identity shifts supported by small actions. You don't claim to be an athlete. You claim to be someone who is prioritizing their health. You don't claim to be a best-selling author. You claim to be someone who writes regularly. These smaller identity claims are believable because you can provide evidence for them immediately through your actions. As you continue to gather evidence through consistent action, your identity can gradually expand. Someone who prioritizes their health becomes someone who is getting fit. Someone who writes regularly becomes a writer. The identity grows organically as the evidence accumulates. There's something else happening here that's important to understand. When you start identifying with a behavior, you also start protecting that identity. It becomes part of how you see yourself, and you don't want to lose it. This creates a positive feedback loop. The behavior reinforces the identity, and the identity protects the behavior. Think about people who strongly identify with a particular role or community. A person who identifies as a musician will make sacrifices to protect their practice time. A person who identifies as a parent will prioritize their children even when it's inconvenient. A person who identifies as a professional will maintain standards even when no one is watching. Their identity provides motivation that goes beyond external rewards or punishments. This is the level of commitment you want to cultivate with your improvement efforts. You want to reach the point where the behavior is so integrated into your identity that not doing it would feel like a betrayal of who you are. This doesn't mean the behavior becomes effortless. It means the behavior becomes non-negotiable because it's tied to your sense of self. But identity can also trap you if you're not careful. If your identity becomes too rigid, too narrowly defined, it can prevent you from growing or adapting. This is why some people resist change even when their current path clearly isn't working. The change would require letting go of an identity they've held for years or decades, and that feels like losing themselves. The solution is to hold your identity lightly enough that it can evolve as you evolve. Think of your identity not as a fixed state, but as an ongoing process. You're not a noun. You're a verb. You're not a writer. You're someone who writes. You're not an athlete. You're someone who is developing their athletic capacity. This subtle shift in language creates space for growth and change without threatening your sense of self. It also helps to have multiple sources of identity rather than basing your entire sense of self on one role or characteristic. If your identity is solely based on your career and you lose your job, your entire sense of self is threatened. But if your identity includes being a parent, a friend, a creator, a learner, and various other roles, you have multiple sources of stability. You can let go of one aspect of your identity without losing yourself entirely. As you work on forcing yourself to improve, pay attention to the identity shifts happening beneath the surface behaviors. Notice when you start naturally thinking of yourself in new ways. Notice when you start making decisions based on who you're becoming rather than who you've been. These shifts are signs that the change is becoming integrated at a deep level. And remember, every single action you take is evidence. Every choice is a vote. You don't need to wait until you've achieved some major milestone to start identifying with your new identity. You can start right now, in this moment, by taking one small action that's consistent with who you want to become. That action is a vote. Cast enough votes, gather enough evidence, and eventually your identity will shift to align with your actions. The beautiful thing about identity-based change is that it works with your psychology rather than against it. You're not trying to force yourself to act in ways that contradict who you believe you are. You're becoming someone for whom these actions are natural expressions of your identity. The force required drops dramatically because you're not fighting yourself anymore. You're simply being yourself, and yourself is someone who does the things that lead to improvement,